Okay, and thank you all so much for being at my session today, titled Engaging Our Power Beyond Algorithmic Bias, Reframing and Resisting AI Empire. Before we dive in, I just want to thank San Jose State University and the Future of AI.org for supporting this event. All right, and thank you again so much for being here. My name is Sarah Appedu, and I am a second-year PhD student in information science at Syracuse University. My presentation is an invitation to think about how critical concepts from the area of critical data studies can help librarians leverage their power to resist and challenge harmful discourses around AI. My future research will look into how librarians may already be doing this and what support may be needed to do so, and I look forward to this being an ongoing conversation. Before I begin, I want to thank my advisor, Dr. Jasmina Tacheva, for her inspiring work on AI Empire and her mentorship in putting together these ideas, as well as my colleague, Miracle Wright at the University of Colorado, for her feedback and research partnership. I also want to note that I'll be saving your questions for the end of this presentation, and our moderator, Sam, will be monitoring the chat throughout. So as I mentioned in the presentation abstract, librarians have and will continue to play an instrumental role in challenging and critiquing new technological advancements, including those powered by AI. While source evaluation and identifying algorithmic bias are vital, more can be done to move past the reactionary state in which librarians are often represented as being. Doing so can empower librarians as individuals and as a field at large to take an active role in reframing and resisting the capitalist colonizing origins of the technology industry and the discourses in which they engage to disempower ourselves and our communities. This session is intended to review conceptual advancements in the field of critical technology and information studies. I hope to show how these perspectives can help us resist the constant accusations of irrelevance that librarians have had to endure, while simultaneously acknowledging the agency librarians hold in both upholding and resisting oppressive systems. One of the concepts we'll be discussing today is AI Empire, which I reference in the title of this talk. This framework was developed by my advisor, Dr. Tacheva, and her colleague, Dr. Rama Subramanian, to highlight the interlocking ideologies of capitalism, colonialism, racism, and heteropatriarchy that fuel harmful practices associated with AI and motivate their development. These systems are the roots of AI empire, which lead to intersecting mechanisms like automation and essentialism that serve the ends of these dominating ideologies like profit and social control. These mechanisms are enacted within various types of organizations. And the practice that sticks out to me most when thinking about libraries is classification. From cataloging to collection development to policies about who is and is not allowed in the building, libraries in various ways are designed to classify, to gatekeep, and contain, despite the many ways librarians have worked to make their services and policies more welcoming and inclusive. And I think this framework is useful for seeing how librarians and libraries may be inherently implicated in AI empire, or what we may think of as its fruits. This is not to say that librarians themselves are the problem, but that looking at the roots of our field in the mechanisms of empire can help us see the agency we hold in resisting these systems. But first, we have to see them as such, systems, not just objects or tools. Like trees, these systems are fed and nourished. So as we think about the role of libraries and librarians in resisting AI empire, I want us to consider what other resources could be fed into these systems to grow something new. Or better yet, what new types of systems could we help cultivate? How can we leverage our skills and powers as librarians to make these systems a reality? In my experience, librarians are often being framed as reactionary to changes in technology instead of ahead of them. I've heard this from my colleagues and fellow students, from my preliminary research participants, and I've seen these sentiments in the media, which perpetuates assumptions that librarians are apparently always at risk of being made obsolete. For example, this post from 2010 from a librarian at an Air Force base is basically imploring their community to see that libraries are not obsolete just because the internet is becoming increasingly popular. Similarly, in 2012, someone posted to the Reddit thread "Are libraries?" asking, "Are librarians totally obsolete?" And someone who we can probably presume is a librarian responded that librarians aren't obsolete, they're just increasingly invisible. I think that's the real challenge, not figuring out how to adapt and stay relevant because we have and are. But many folks don't associate a library with, say, or a librarian with, say, accessing JSTOR or scanning an ebook. And I'm sure these are perhaps things many of us have heard in our work. I know I certainly have. Again, a community college library posted this blog post in 2015 asking the question or responding to the question, "Are librarians becoming obsolete? A decade retrospective," commenting on a post that they had made 10 years previously, pointing that this question keeps coming up and that we keep having to respond to it. And then most recently, this post from the Scholarly Kitchen in 2023 is titled, "The Efficacy of ChatGPT, Is It Time for Librarians to Go Home?" And this author, like all of the authors I've shown, are librarians, and they know that libraries aren't going anywhere, but yet they still have to be responding to this critique. And this idea of librarians being reactionary and needing to defend themselves isn't new. These sentiments have existed for a long time and seem to reoccur every time a new innovation comes around. This article from 2023, which is titled "Librarians Against the Machines, Is ChatGPT the Incarnation of Emmerich?" references the 1957 film Desk Set, which features a fictional supercomputer called Emmerich with the potential to disrupt the functioning of the library and threaten the employment of the librarians. And this really echoes the same threats being leveraged against us today. And this goes all the way back to the 1950s. So librarians have been resisting this discourse for a long time, but to what extent have we been resisting its roots? These examples aren't meant to be proof that librarians are constantly on the verge of extinction, but it does show that this perception exists and that it shapes how librarians and others view the role of the library in their communities. And this threat of obsolescence becomes even louder when combined with the several other fronts on which librarians find themselves being attacked. For example, this article from The Atlantic from 2023 titled "The Librarians Are Not Okay" summarizes some pretty disturbing accusations that have been made against librarians. I'm not going to read the subtitle because I'm aware that I'm being recorded and posted to the internet, and you never know where your voice is going to end up these days, but I highly encourage you to look at this article. And so I asked myself, how often are librarians having to defend ourselves against these types of critiques, and which critiques do we actually need to pay attention to? Thinking about our tree metaphor, we might view these sentiments as representing the trajectory of librarianship as being shaped by the weather patterns that surround us. We cannot control or change them, but only hope to weather through them long enough to adapt. In this discourse, there is a clear need to assert how librarians can enact agency over technological change and suggest that radical paradigm shifts might be needed to do this successfully. I think many of us in libraries know intrinsically that libraries aren't going away. And our history of adapting to new technologies like computers, the internet, and online search engines provides some evidence that we will continue to adapt. But there may be some truth behind these sentiments that must be reconciled with. A new wave of critical librarianship in the past several years has forced us to reconcile with the ways librarians have indeed been behind the times, and how today's discourse around AI may be a critical juncture at which librarians can position themselves as change makers, not reactors or deterrers. In the past, librarians have not always been open to change and have often upheld systems of inequality. While there have always been radical librarians willing to challenge the status quo and acknowledge libraries' potential for harm, there is still a ways to go in moving past this history. We might consider that what lies underneath the sentiments of being reactionary to changes in technology is the reality that libraries were designed not to anticipate or provoke change, but to uphold the dominant social and moral order. There is now a wealth of scholarship available demonstrating the ways that libraries and the white women who worked in them have reinforced social inequality through segregated buildings, oppressive cataloging and classification systems, the denial of unhoused people, the perpetuation of literacy as a measure of civic participation, and many other examples. This is not to say that individual librarians or even librarians as a whole are entirely responsible for the arrangements of society. The point is that libraries as institutions have always played an important role in maintaining the power of an elite class, even power that they as women did not always have access to. Today's libraries have made enormous strides in acknowledging this history and making changes towards inclusion and reparation. And we have made very strong attempts to take this critical ethos into our approaches to technology. And yet the accusations of irrelevance persist. So what more may be needed to overcome this discourse? And thinking back to our original questions, what resources might we feed into these systems to grow something new? What new systems could librarians be a part of creating? Challenging technological innovation must be seen as inseparable from our attempts to resist oppression in other areas of librarianship. As I mentioned, librarians and other information scholars have made important progress in helping our field incorporate new technologies like AI into our work and to critically interrogate their potential problems. For example, in 2016, ALA President Emily Drabinski used queer theory to demonstrate the inherently unstable and oppressive nature of the library catalog, which cannot simply be fixed by switching outdated terms for new ones. Sophia Noble showed us in 2018 how Google's search engine replicates the same biases that have been identified in the library catalog, and points out that these technical systems themselves are built around the biases and privileges of white Western men, resulting in demonstrably racist and sexist outputs. And in 2019, Matthew Reitsma showed how the same effect can be found in library databases, which at one point had been considered less biased than online search engines. And now librarians are wrestling with how our previous experiences can prepare us to handle the impact of AI technologies on our communities. And there are several points of view on how this should be done. Do librarians need to become technical experts on the workings of AI? Should they be learning how to use these tools themselves? And if so, which ones? And should we be helping our patrons endure these changes? Or is there something else we could do? One way we can start to answer these questions is by moving past the common conception of AI technologies as objects or tools. While this view can be useful for assisting patrons in the short term, it can undermine the power of these technologies to shape not only users' perceptions of information, but also shape their behaviors and reinforce the status quo at individual, organizational, and social levels. Instead of directing attention towards the creators and systems that support the development of harmful technologies, it puts the primary responsibility on the user to navigate them and denies their agency to change them. It also focuses on the biases embedded within the technological artifact, but overlooks that these biases are embedded there by design to maintain oppressive systems. This is not to say that algorithmic literacy is not important. It very much is. But we need to situate our use and critiques of these tools within these larger discourses of capitalism, patriarchy, and white supremacy, and colonialism, in order to move past fixating on just the bad apples and branches and help our patrons see the system's roots. Like the library catalog, these technologies cannot simply be fixed, and their harms cannot be mitigated through individual critical reflection alone. So AI empire, as we have discussed, is one way of conceptualizing AI technologies, not as objects, but as socio-technical systems, where society, humans, and technology are seen as inseparable and co-constitutive of one another. There are two other important concepts I want to discuss before we look at their import for librarianship. Another is the concept of the TESCREAL bundle, which has been theorized by Emil Torres and Timnit Gebru. TESCREAL is an acronym which stands for transhumanism, extropianism, singularitarianism, cosmism, rationalism, effective altruism, and long-termism. Unfortunately, we do not have time to define each of these terms, and I highly recommend reading their article when it's publicly available. The main takeaway from their work for our purposes is the way they demonstrate the legacy of first-wave eugenics, which was once hailed as a legitimate science by many influential academic and industrial leaders, as the primary motivator for the development of an all-knowing, all-powerful AI technology. The implications for this argument cast a grave light on our work to resist the uncritical adoption of AI into our communities and raise our critical consciousness about the desires that motivate their development. This is not simply a matter of overcoming misinformation and recognizing the biased output of algorithms. It's acknowledging the ways information technologies are designed to reinforce ideologies that see certain bodies as human and certain bodies as disposable. Other scholars like Ali in 2019 have recognized this eugenic legacy embedded in AI development, particularly the ways that TESCREAlists like Elon Musk and Nick Bostrom perpetuate the necessary existential risks of AI development. According to these so-called thinkers, developing an all-knowing AI comes with an existential risk to the human species in the form often of a sentient robot apocalypse where machines learn to overcome the will of their masters and take over control of the planet, leaving humans as a subservient species to the robot overlords. And yet, they also want us to think that not developing AI would be a failure of human potential to transcend our bodies and colonize the universe. Therefore, in their view, the rest of us must be willing to let these technologies be unleashed into present society for the greater good of a non-existent future society. And of course, we don't need to worry about climate change, genocide, or growing income inequality because the robots will take care of all of that if they don't kill us first. But as these critical scholars alarmingly point out, who these thinkers are willing to sacrifice for their cause is clear, and the working class global majority has long been paying the price of this innovation. So this has been grim, and rightly so. These frameworks cause us to reckon with the ways scientific knowledge and technological advancement have always been used to maintain the power of the elite and disempower those whose subjugation they rely on. But implicit in this power dynamic is the realization that this discourse of fear that technological elites perpetuate, fear of AI, fear of apocalypse, fear of falling behind and becoming obsolete, hides their true fear, fear that the other will recognize their power and use it. Ruha Benjamin's new book, Imagination, offers beautiful examples of how we can all resist these systems, and I encourage everyone here to read it along with all of her other work. But for now, I want to share some of her words, which capture these ideas better than I could. After discussing in more depth the critiques I just described, she writes, "But even if the threatening nature of this newish imagination doesn't yet feel urgent to you, I at least hope your critical faculties are tingling. As each new generation expands their imagination, let them also develop a keener ability to detect bullshit. Each of us can foster the kind of discernment that tells the difference between new stories of collective well-being and faux fables deciding our collective fate." A few pages later, she reminds us, "So too, when we work to cultivate collective vision for transforming the world, we must be careful not to fetishize imagination as somehow operating magically and independently from other powerful ingredients, like strategizing and organizing, to make our vision a reality." The number of attendees at this conference and the abundance of submissions shows that librarians as a collective have immense power. I know I promised to provide some practical advice at the end of this talk, but honestly, it would be disingenuous of me to say that I know exactly how these ideas translate into your individual contexts. And of course, this will be a subject of my future research. But you are the experts in your own life, in your own work, in your own organizations. And the truth is that there is no checklist you can use to make sure you're resisting oppressive systems. This work must be collective, and recognizing the ways our field has historically been organized around these oppressive systems we are here to problematize is a critical new step at imagining something new. And so I hope to leave you with these questions to take with you into your days. You can start thinking about what changes you can seed in your community. And these changes can be tangible or intangible. Capitalism makes us think we have to have a product to show that our work was valuable, to prove that we did something. But this critical work is often intangible. It's about how we move through the world, how we interact with others, how we relate to the technologies we encounter every day. So where in your life, in your consciousness, can you start seeding these changes? And note that these changes aren't necessarily going to pop out immediately. Sometimes they take nourishment and time to grow. And speaking of nourishment, what resources do you need to do that? And what would it take to get them? What would collective imagination look like to you? And with whom do you need to be in solidarity in order to work towards making your shared imagination a reality? Our work from here forward is difficult, and there is no easy solution. I hope this talk has left you with some seedlings that can be planted in your mind or your community as you continue to think about how resisting oppressive technological systems can be a collective effort among librarians and our communities. Beyond navigating these tools and learning about their flaws, we must come together as a field to reckon with the ways our history has set us up to be reactionary instead of visionary or revolutionary. We must think about the ways our lessons, tools, and services are designed to hide the creators and systems underneath the surface. And we must be willing to imagine something new, something radical, something that recognizes librarians as the agents they are and the potential they hold when organized around something greater. For too long, that something greater has been handed down to us from on high by those who came before us. I think that it's time for us to grow something new. And that's my talk for today. Thank you so much for listening. I am sincerely so grateful for having you all here today. I think we have a few minutes left for some questions, if there are any. I also would love to hear your ideas, your concerns, your hopes, your dreams, your worries. I am just at the beginning of my research journey and my career, and this is definitely going to be an ongoing conversation, and I look forward to continuing to be engaged with you all in the future. So thank you so much. All right, I'm just looking at the chat now. Hi, Sam.
Hi, yeah, no questions in the chat. Some great conversation, a lot of people sharing links and stuff. So definitely interesting for those who are following along. But if you guys have a question, feel free to post it in the chat.
Yes, I'm seeing a lot of resources. Thank you so much. I will definitely be adding all of these to my Zotero library. And I have my email in the slides. I'll drop it in the chat as well. I will be doing a dissertation at some point. I am currently in my second year of my PhD, and I really hope to spend time interviewing and speaking with librarians throughout the dissertation process. So if you're inspired by this topic and really would like to get your opinion known and would like to talk to someone about it, I'm always happy just to chat.
Sarah, I found some people were using the Q&A, so I'm actually just going to copy and paste the question into the chat, but I'll read it out loud too.
Okay, great.
So we have thoughts on pressure of employers to teach AI technology and balance with critical perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's reasonable, right? On one hand, we can't completely refuse to ever interact with those technologies because how are we going to know what they're doing? How are we going to properly educate our communities on what these technology means and what the impact is in order to really do something if we don't even know where to begin. So, on one hand, there's potentially a benefit to being forced in a way to use these technologies. Even for myself, I am not a frequent user of ChatGPT. I have to remind myself that I really need to explore this technology as it continues to make changes. So on one hand, it's incredibly useful, but of course, on the other hand, we're trying to make these small scale changes whenever we can. So this is where I think thinking about our agency in whatever capacity we have comes into play. And actually, Benjamin's book, Viral Justice, which came out before Imagination, is incredibly useful for thinking about this. She talks about the ways that justice, almost like a virus, can be spread through these teeny tiny interactions. So this is something I asked some of my interview participants, how would you feel if your employer says you have to use this tool, but you're a little bit concerned about it? Finding those ways in any individual interaction you have with someone to point out its flaws and maybe acknowledge some of the greater trends you're seeing with these tools is one place to start. And that's why I really think, looking internally, asking ourselves, how do I feel about this technology and where are these feelings coming from? Is this a genuine feeling of skepticism that's coming from inside of me? Or is there some other voice in my head telling me this technology is bad, don't use it, or this technology is good, you have to use it? So really just remaining critical of the perspectives we're sharing with our patrons and where they came from before we started sharing them. I know that's still quite abstract, but I hope that helps a little bit.
All right. Okay. I'm combining, it was kind of two questions from the same person, but they're very similar. So I'm combining them together. So they say, I have heard a little bit about how the back end of AI is affecting the environment and also how it is disproportionately affecting people in the third world. Do you know about this?
Yes, I do know about this. I wouldn't say I'm an expert. Actually, my advisor, Dr. Chicheva, does a lot of work on transnational feminism and transglobal solidarity. And she's an incredible person to read her work. And this AI Empire article definitely touches on these things. The environmental impact is actually something I'm really interested in because I didn't get to talk about it in this particular talk, but a lot of times when we think about socio-technical systems, the earth is often completely left out of those conversations. And for me, it's really interesting to think about not only humans and systems and technology as having agency, but the earth as well as really the ultimate, most all-encompassing system that we all exist in. So yeah, that is definitely an incredibly important area. And it is 100% something I plan on addressing more in my work. And yeah, there's definitely plenty of scholars doing work in that area. And it looks like some people are sharing resources, which is fantastic.
Awesome. Yes. I mean, this chat is a very active chat. It's great. Okay. And
Yeah,
here's
it's
another.
great. Will we be able to save this chat after the talk?
Yes, we should be able to. And if anyone, I think you can even just go save chat, like in the little menu bar at the bottom. If not, I can
Yes,
save it
great.
and make sure to send it to you. All right.
Perfect.
So how are you seeing AI in your work? How are people reacting to your thoughts and research?
Yeah, so I'm a PhD student right now, and it's very interesting to see the ways that different students, depending on what their research interest is and what their background is, are taking up AI technologies. Obviously, people who are more inclined towards computational methods and more technical approaches have been quicker to adopt it into their work, whereas someone like me, who's very qualitative and critical, has been quite slow to start actually using these tools. And that's something, again, with myself that I need to, be mindful about practicing and not, hiding from these tools, as I've just said throughout this presentation. So that's one of the big differences I'm seeing. And it makes me think a lot about the field of information science more broadly as a field that is scholarly and research based, but is also deeply practice and community based. There's a lot of divisions within the field of information science, and I'm really interested in how we can create more solidarity among these different areas, because I do think there's disparities in how like librarians are responding to AI versus people who are in like the hard data scientists or who are preparing to maybe become part of the technology industry. So that's one of the ways I'm currently seeing it in my work. And in terms of reactions, this is one of the first, it's really the second talk that I have done on this topic in quite a while. Like I said, I'm at the beginning of my journey. And so far the reactions have been mostly positive. Like I said, people who are not librarians maybe don't always connect to the critiques as easily because the role of librarians in society is just so clear. They're so directly connected to the public, whereas other types of information sciences don't necessarily have that same face-to-face contact. So that's, again, something I'm trying to think about in the future, is how can we really bring these different groups together and increase solidarity and increase our power as a collective.
All right, I have thankfully one more question because we are basically out of time. It says, as a white and cisgender appearing person, how do you reconcile your identities with your work, i.e. how do you avoid being a research tourist?
That's an interesting question. The term research tourist, I think, is interesting. You know, identity is obviously important in every single project you do. And a lot of times we'll see, oh, I see people are going to the keynote. Please go over to that if you're able to, but I'll try to quickly answer this question. Positionality matters anytime we do anything, right? I'm always speaking from where I am, where I came from, who I was raised to be, and who I've chosen to become over the course of my life. And it's really easy to just sort of stick a positionality statement at the front of your presentation and never speak about it again. My approach really deeply comes from the fact that I am a white, cisgender, queer, first generation American, like lower middle class PhD student. And this is why I think it's so important for me to speak out, because I have this power, I have this privilege, I have this ability to really, hopefully, as much as I can, speak my mind in these elite spaces and not be vilified for it in the way that some of my colleagues of color or trans colleagues might be. So I very much see it as a responsibility of mine to speak out about these topics, to point out the ways that groups that I am not a part of are being impacted by them. And of course, in the ways that librarianship as a whole largely does not reflect the groups that are primarily being harmed by these technologies. So it's a really great question. I really appreciate you asking it. And it's something I think we can all think about.
All right, that's all the questions. I think Thank you so much for presenting, and thank you everyone for being part of this and a very active chat. The recording, and I believe this, if Sarah has sent the slides, should be posted within the next week or so on our Library 2.0 website. So thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Sam, for moderating.